You spend weeks, even months crafting those early chapters. You want the beginning of your novel to hook readers instantly, to grip them, to matter. You want them to lean in and think, I'm in. But instead, something's off. It's not that it's bad, it just doesn't land like your favorite books do, the way you know it could. So you rewrite, tweak the dialogue, reshuffle the order just in case, and still it doesn't click. And deep down, you're scared. What if your story's good, but no one sticks around long enough to find out? This happens to writers all the time. Not because they lack talent, but because no one ever told them what the opening act is really meant to do. And to make things worse, most writers build their entire beginning around what they were taught the inciting incident is, when it's actually something else entirely, which means their story never gets the kind of inciting incident that pulls readers in the way bestsellers do. And by the time readers would get hooked, they've already checked out. If you're new here, hey, I'm Julian, former storytelling consultant for brands and entrepreneurs, turned writing coach for aspiring authors. If your goal is to write a novel so captivating that readers finish it breathless and immediately want to dive back in, hit subscribe and stick around. On this channel, I share all the storytelling frameworks that I've developed over the years to help you make that dream happen with structure, clarity, and zero vague advice. This video is part 2 of a 5-part series on how bestseller authors structure their novel. Now, you don't need to watch part 1 to follow along here, but if you're curious about how best-selling authors emotionally hook readers before the inciting incident even kicks in, then there'll be a link in the description down below waiting for you. Today, we're focusing on how to structure your opening act while making sure that it's deeply connected to your protagonist's internal conflict. And to help you apply these methods to your own story, I've put together a free opening act workbook. It walks you through all 6 steps covered in this video and includes breakdown from Harry Potter and the Hunger Games. You can grab your copy using the link below. Alright, before we dive into the opening act, there are 2 key things that you need to know about the methods that I share here on the channel called the storytelling pillars. If you've been a friend of the channel, you might feel tempted to skip this part, but trust me, sometimes becoming a better writer is about being reminded of what you already know. The first key point about this method is that it's built around 6 core elements that create narrative tension. These are the inciting incident, so something disrupt the status quo and throw things off balance. The progressive complications, tension builds as things gets harder. The turning point, the ultimate complication that forces a point of no return. The moment of crisis and contemplation, so that's when your character faces that dilemma and there is no easy way out. The climax, where action reveals the choice that's been made, and the resolution, where we see the consequences of that choice and something internal or external has changed. The second key point is that these 6 pillars don't just happen once in your story and we're done with it. They repeat at different levels, like Russian nesting dolls of structure. Some levels are obvious, other might surprise you. But don't worry, we're not diving into all 6 today. In this video, we're focusing on the second level, the essential parts of your story, and more specifically, the first one called the trigger part. Now that we understand where we are in the framework, let's look at the first pillar of your opening act, and perhaps the most misunderstood story element of all time, the inciting incident. This is where your story truly begins, and it's more precise than most writers realize. For those of you familiar with my methods, something interesting happens here. The inciting incident of the trigger part, so the second level, also happens to be the inciting incident of the dual storyline, so the first level, the level before that. This is one of those powerful moments where 2 levels of your story structure connect. For those new to the channel, here's what you need to know. The inciting incident of your opening act should kick off 2 storylines. What's commonly called the A story, so the plot of your story, and the B story, the inner journey of your protagonist. So it's not just about shaking up the protagonist's external world, it also cracks open their internal world, setting off an emotional journey. This moment can come as an event or an encounter, like meeting a mysterious stranger or running into something totally unexpected or out of the ordinary. Now, quick warning, if you've been taught that the inciting incident is the moment everything blows up, that it is the call to action, you're not alone. When I asked my newsletter what they thought the inciting incident of the Hunger Games was, nearly everyone said the same thing. Prim's name is drawn and Katniss volunteers to save her. But that answer is exactly why this video had to be made. Because that moment, yes, it's powerful, but it's not the inciting incident. And if you build your whole opening act around that kind of moment, you risk skipping the real entry point of your story, the one that best-selling authors never overlook. In the Hunger Games, the real inciting incident happens earlier. It's the reaping itself. The very fact that the reaping is happening today throws everything off balance. Katniss's external world and her inner sense of safety and control. From that moment on, she can't pretend life is normal. Sure, to us it's a dystopia, but to Katniss, this is just the way things are. Until today. Because now the system she's been living under isn't just a distant threat, it's calling for blood. And she knows it might take someone she loves. So what about when Prim's name is drawn? That is actually the turning point of the trigger part of the Hunger Games, the final irreversible complication that pushes Katniss towards a life-altering choice. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now let's look at another example. Harry Potter. For the very first time in his life, someone wrote him a letter. That might seem small, but for Harry, it's massive. He spent his entire childhood invisible, unloved, and unwanted. In his world, his existence means nothing to nobody. But then, one day, someone reaches out. That letter doesn't just break the routine. It shatters the illusion that he's a nobody. From that moment on, Harry can't go back to life as it was. Something shifts deep inside, and even if he doesn't fully understand it yet, we do, and that's the inciting incident of the trigger part. By zooming in like this, you start to see that these moments aren't just important events tossed in randomly, they have precise roles. Roles that only make sense when you understand where they belong in the structure of your story. So for this first step of the trigger part, ask yourself, what event or encounter disrupts your protagonist's ordinary world and pulls the rug out from under their everyday existence? How does this inciting incident not only challenge your protagonist externally, but also crack open their internal world? What false belief or emotional wound does this inciting incident begin to expose in your protagonist? Quick note here, if you've watched the video on the internal conflict equation, then ask yourself, what moral and psychological needs does this inciting incident begin to expose in your protagonist? Could your protagonist realistically walk away from this inciting incident unchanged? If yes, how can you make it more personally significant to them? And lastly, what is at stake for your protagonist if they ignore this inciting incident? Next up, the progressive complications. This is where the tension starts stacking up. One complication isn't enough. You want a series of escalating challenges or details that make your protagonist's world feel increasingly unstable. These complications can be external, things happening around them, or internal, shifts in their thoughts, feeling, or gut instincts. In the trigger part, so the opening act of your novel, these complications don't immediately thrust your character into the main conflict. Instead, they build pressure, the hint that something big is coming. Your protagonist senses it, even if they don't fully get what's headed their way. Every new complication should raise the stakes, increase uncertainty, or force the character to pay closer attention. Think of it like tightening a knot. Each loop adds tension, making that final snap, your turning point, all the more powerful. Now, let's check out the progressive complication in the Hunger Games. They start small, but build real, tangible tension. First, Prim is old enough to be picked. That immediately put Katniss on edge. She's protective, and now her sister is vulnerable in a way that she never has been before. On top of that, their mother is emotionally absent, still haunted by trauma. If anything happens to Katniss or Prim, there's no safety net. Then we learn Katniss has had to put her name in multiple times just to get extra food for the family. That raises the stakes even more. Now, not only is Prim at risk, but so is Katniss. Each complication adds pressure. Katniss is caught in an impossible situation, and the ripping hasn't even started yet. She's holding up a family barely surviving, and even if she's not fully aware yet, you can sense that she's inching towards a breaking point. And there's a cool detail that you can only see through the lens of this method. If you're paying close attention, you'll notice that Katniss's choice to enter her name multiple times isn't just a random detail to raise the stakes. It's a climax within a different level. It's a flawed action that reveals her internal struggle and desperation, setting up the emotional stakes long before the main plot fully kicks in. Now, let's see how the progressive complications unfold in Harry Potter's trigger part and who exactly they complicate things for. First, the Dursleys won't let Harry read the letter. That's a direct complication for Harry. He finally gets noticed, then it's immediately ripped away. Then, more letters start flooding in, dozens, then hundreds. Now the pressure shifts. It's a complication for the Dursleys. They're losing control and their desperate attempts to silence the truth are failing fast. They uproot the whole family, fleeing to a shack on a rock in the middle of the sea. Now the complication is for whoever's trying to reach Harry. The message still hasn't been delivered and time is running out. Meanwhile, Harry's stuck in the middle, growing more confused, more curious. Something is coming for him, but he doesn't know what or why. So to determine the progressive complications of your story, ask yourself, what series of escalating challenges intensify the pressure on your protagonist after the inciting incident? How do these complications gradually escalate in intensity or significance? How do these complications gradually close off your protagonist's escape routes or easy solutions? How does each complication raise either the external stakes or internal emotional pressure? And lastly, how do these progressive complications connect to your protagonist's internal struggles or flaws? Next comes the turning point. This is when all that pressure finally snaps, the moment that breaks the old normal and forces your character into a new reality. It's not just a dramatic twist, it's the irreversible complication, the one that cracks something open inside your protagonist. After this, they can't go back to how things were, emotionally, practically, or psychologically. And this is what is commonly perceived as the main inciting incident of a story. Now, take the Hunger Games. After all the tension that's been building, Prim's name is drawn. In that instant, everything changes. This isn't fear in the abstract anymore, it's personal, it's brutal. Katniss's worst nightmare has just become reality. She doesn't act right away, but you can feel it hit her. This is the moment that throws her world off balance and forces her to face the reality of what just happened, that the system just took the one person she cannot bear to lose. And she knows nothing can stay the same after this. Now, let's take Harry Potter, for example. After all the tension, the silence, the running, the turning point hit when Hagrid burst through the door. Boom, it's not just that someone found them, it's that this person knows Harry's name, knows his past, and says the words that change everything.
You're a wizard, Harry.
That's the moment Harry's world truly breaks open. Until now, things were strange and escalating, but he still had no clue what it all meant. Now he can't unhear it, and he can't unknow it. And just like that, the story shifts. We're still in the opening act, but we've left the ordinary inner world behind. So do you see it now? When you misidentify the turning point of your opening act as the inciting incident of your story, you don't just mislabel a moment. You set your whole story off balance. You rush the emotional buildup, you skip the slow burn tension, and you even flatten your protagonist's transformation. And the worst part, you leave readers disconnected without even realizing why. That's the real cost. Not a technical slip, but a misunderstanding that quietly robs your story of its depth. If you've ever felt like your opening just didn't land the way it should, this might be why. So ask yourself, what's the final complication that pushes your protagonist to their breaking point? What moment forces your protagonist to confront a truth they can no longer deny or escape? How does this turning point make returning to normal impossible for your protagonist? What specifically shifts in your protagonist's understanding of themselves or their world? How does this turning point connect to your protagonist's deepest fear or desire? Quick note again, if you watched the video on the internal conflict equation, then ask yourself, how does this turning point not only connect to both your protagonist's psychological and moral needs, but also to their conflicting desires? Then comes the moment of crisis and contemplation, the still point before everything unravels. The world has just shifted, the ground beneath the protagonist is no longer stable, but instead of acting right away, they pose. This is where the emotional weight finally lands. The stakes crystallize. The protagonist is forced to confront a dilemma, a choice between two paths, each carrying real consequences. And there's no clear right answer. That's what makes it powerful. Acting will cost them something, but so will doing nothing. And for a brief moment, the story gives them space to feel it. This isn't hesitation out of weakness, it's a moment of depth, reflection, because once they move forward, there is no going back. This is the quiet before the storm. Now, before we dive into the examples, there is one thing I want to make clear. Each of these pillars represents a narrative function, not necessarily a full scene. You might show all 6 inside one tight chapter, or you might stretch them out across multiple scenes depending on the tone and the pacing of your story. What matters most is not how many scenes you use, but that each pillar does its job, shifting the story forward in a meaningful way. Now, if we look at the Hunger Games, Prim's name has just been drawn, but Katniss doesn't immediately shout or move. She freezes. This is her moment of crisis and contemplation of the opening act. You can see it in her eyes, her mind racing, her body unable to move. If she does nothing, her little sister is going to die. But if she acts, if she volunteers, she's likely walking into her own death instead. It's not a heroic moment yet, it's a gut-wrenching dilemma. She's suspended between two unbearable outcomes, and just for a swift moment, the story lets her feel the weight of that choice. This is where the emotional core of the trigger part peaks, because now it is no longer just about survival, it's about what Katniss is willing to sacrifice and why. Okay, now if we go back to Harry Potter, Hagrid has just dropped the bomb, "You're a wizard." But Harry doesn't leap into action. He doesn't cheer or run off to Hogwarts. Instead, there's a pause. This is Harry's moments of crisis and contemplation of the opening act.
You've made a mistake. I mean, I can't be a wizard. I mean, I'm just Harry.
He's just been told that everything he thought about himself was a lie, that he belongs to an entirely different world, and now he has to ask himself, can I believe this? Should I go? What does this mean about who I am? He's faced with a choice. Stay in the life he's always known, even if it's miserable, or step into something completely unknown and possibly dangerous. Neither path is easy, and that's exactly what makes it a true moment of internal crisis. So ask yourself, what impossible choice must your protagonist now face as a result of the turning point? What does your protagonist stand to lose regardless of which path they choose? How does this dilemma connect to your protagonist's internal conflict? What uncomfortable reality or personal truth must your protagonist acknowledge during this moment of reflection? For example, in the Hunger Games, Katniss must confront the reality that she values Prim's life above her own, and that her identity as a protector defines her more than her instinct for self-preservation. And lastly, how can you show this internal struggle externally to readers through body language, dialogue, or even symbolic imagery? Next up is the climax of the trigger part. This is the moment where the protagonist takes action. It answers the internal question raised during the moment of crisis. What will they do? It's not always big or loud, but it's always definitive. If the crisis was the emotional and moral crossroads, the climax is where they step onto one path. It's the action that reveals their choice, not in words, not in theory, but through movement, through decision, through risk. That's what gives the climax its power. It transforms inner tension into outer behavior. We're no longer wondering what they'll do. We're watching it unfold. So what does that look like in action? Let's go back to our examples. For the Hunger Games, the climax of the trigger part is pretty iconic. Katniss steps forward and yells,
I volunteer! I volunteer! I volunteer as tribute!
It's loud, raw, immediate. It cuts through the silence like a blade. But it's not just dramatic for drama's sake. It's the physical expression of her choice. In that moment, she decides to sacrifice herself to save her sister. This is what the climax is all about. A clear, committed action that reveals where the character stands and what they're willing to risk. And just like that, the trajectory of her story changes forever. Now, in Harry Potter, after that moment of hesitation, after all the disbelief and doubt, Harry makes his choice. He says yes. It's quiet, it's simple, but that's what makes it so powerful. Despite the confusion, despite the fear, he agrees to leave the only life he's ever known and step into the world of magic. That's the climax of the trigger part of Harry Potter. It's the moment where his choice becomes real, not just emotionally, but physically. He aligns himself with his new reality, even if he doesn't fully understand it yet. And from here on out, there's no turning back. So for your own novel, ask yourself, what specific action does your protagonist take that reveals their choice? How does this action hint at your protagonist's true nature? Is the action dramatic enough to feel satisfying while remaining true to your protagonist's character? What personal line must your protagonist cross to take this action? And lastly, how does this action set up the larger journey ahead? Finally, we reach the resolution of the trigger part. This is where we see the results and consequences of the climax, what happens because of the choice the protagonist made. It's pretty much the story's way of showing us how things have changed. The world won't look the same, the characters won't feel the same, there's a before and now there's an after. The resolution closes the trigger part by revealing the new status quo, even if it's temporary. It sets the stage for what's next by showing us what the character has gained, lost, or realized. And with that, the opening act of a story is complete, ready to build on what just happened. For the Hunger Games, the resolution of the trigger parts is when she's pulled onto the stage. Prim is screaming, the crowd falls into silence. This isn't just spectacle, it's aftermath. This is where the emotional weight lands for the reader. The world is no longer the same. Katniss's decision has marked her publicly and personally. She's taken Prim's place, but she's also crossed a line she cannot uncross. In Harry Potter, the resolution of the trigger part begins as Harry follows Hagrid into Diagon Alley. This is no longer about a letter or a question of identity. He steps out of the life he knew, and now he's seeing what that choice really means. He's not just going to a new school, he's entering an entirely different world, one with rules, history, magic, and danger. It's exciting, but also overwhelming. This is where the story lets both Harry and the audience catch their breath and start to absorb the consequences of that decision to leave Privet Drive behind. Harry isn't just reacting anymore, he's moving with the story, participating, and by the end of the trigger part, we know the journey has officially begun. So ask yourself, how has your protagonist's world changed as a direct result of their climactic choice? What immediate new problem or mission emerges from this resolution that will drive your protagonist into the next part of the story? How does this resolution set up the emotional stakes for the next part of your story? And what has your protagonist gained or lost in this opening act that will matter later? Now, you may have noticed that while Harry Potter and the Hunger Games follow the same storytelling pillars, the way they execute them is completely different. And that's the power of these methods. It gives you a clear structure so your story can unfold in a way that feels true to your characters, your voice, and your world. So now that you've built the opening act of your novel, it's time to structure the second part, the trailer moments. That's what we'll cover in the next video. You can watch it by clicking right here. And if it's not ready yet, you'll see the video on internal conflict. So make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss it when the next part drops. And before you go, don't forget to grab your opening act workbook in the description and let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I know it can be a lot, but trust me, once you master these methods, it will truly unlock the full potential of your novel. I'm Julian Maylet, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.